much. Well, yes, I think that housing and affordable housing and social housing, however you want to call it, in its different typologies, I think that is the real challenge all over the world. We're not talking about India. Perhaps in here, the situation is different because of this combination of radical 21st century that you have. You have the most advanced factories and the most advanced industry, together with some of the heaviest social problems that you can find in any city of the world. So this combination makes India also a radical place in terms of housing. I don't dare to, of course, giving you any sort of advice at all. What I'll try to do is going through what I call the 7 problem-solving path, I would say, as a general approximation to what can be a critical analysis of what's going on in places, in big cities, in India and elsewhere. And excuse me if I am too generic, and excuse me if I am too obvious, and excuse me if I make some mistakes, or you consider that this already been taken over by authorities in here. The first thing is very obvious, and it's a real challenge, for example, in a city like Barcelona, is starting filling up the pipeline by the place it has to be filled up. It's buying land. This is obvious. But governments forget that. At least I've been a member of a government for a long time. We forgot that for a long time. We forgot that we had to have a stock of public land in order to generate affordable housing and social housing. If you don't have land, you depend on other people. So start by buying. We have the legislative power, we have the executive power, so buy land. This is the first thing. Obvious, but if you don't have land, you don't have public housing policies. The second thing is, try to win the battle before the battle starts. And we know that 3 things happen. And you have a battle when you have to fight developers. You have a battle when you have to fight migrants that try to place their dwelling wherever they can. And you have a battle when you don't have the correct typology of social housing or affordable housing. So try to win that battle. We know that developers are greedy. We know it. But the truth is that nowadays we start seeing that all over the world also, we find socially responsible developers. Or if you want to be socially responsible, become yourself a developer. But public developers should never be second-class developers or second-division developers. Public developers have to become Champions League developers. They have to set the pace of the quality of the affordable housing of the whole country. Otherwise, what we have is a B-class type that make even greedier the classical developers. Migrants, people moving around the place. We know that they're going to come. We know it. We see that in Kenya. We see that we've worked a lot in Colombia. We've seen that in Colombia with the peace that was signed with the guerrillas a couple of years ago. Even more people are moving from the countryside to the city. So if we know it, why don't we put the solution beforehand? Typology. And I want to come back to that at the end, on the 7th typology. We need different typologies of housings. It is impossible to think about housings of men, women, 4 or 5 children. That's over. So we have to think beforehand what sort of typologies do we need in order to cover the demand. The third approach is value what is important. And I want to go perhaps through a very controversial issue. I'm sorry. We will have one way or another to consolidate what you have there. So slum consolidation, one way or another, will have to happen. There's been an obsession, and we in Barcelona, we made that mistake. I made personally that mistake I thought that taking people out, we don't have slums as you have them anymore. We used to until 1987, not anymore. But we have quarters in a very harsh condition. So we thought that what was easy to do was taking out people from those places and putting them in other places where we built what we thought was good housing. And you know what we did? We destroyed the few things that people had. That people had two things mainly: their family and social bonds and attachment to the place where they lived. And they lived by where they worked mostly. So when we put them in other place, we broke those social relationships and family relationships, and then we forced them to commute to places that they didn't used to commute. So value what is important. In Medellin or in Rio de Janeiro, we know very well that those cases, you know that giving titles of property to those people has been very important. And people say, but yes, but these people are putting their dwellings in illegal places. Do one thing: recognize the property, make an assessment of that property that will allow them to get finance, and perhaps talking to them, they can choose to go to another place, but it is them that have to choose it. So there are ways of attacking that situation. Four, governments, cities have to have a public stock of public housing for rent, because it is the only way to control the market, and it is the only way to attack the problem. We have to have a stock of land, but we have to have a stock of rental affordable housing. 5, look for the intelligent and social responsible developers. I talked about it before, but they exist. And nowadays, the more we digitalize the world, and today we're talking about smart cities, the more intelligent developers go towards the serviced neighborhoods, which means that they understand that they have to stay. The typical developer is the one that throws a brick on the ground, makes a lot of money, and runs away with the cash. The good developers are the ones that are going to stay working with us for 50, 60 years, which means working with the communities. So look for them. 6, there are only 7, I'm finishing. No, I'm going to go for the last one, the 6th one. There's a new scheme of living in the world. We're talking about co-working schemes. Why don't we think about co-living schemes? Why don't we think about places, and that has a cost effect, positive cost effect, but it has a very positive social effect, places in which people can share several parts of the way they live. And I am in India now, and when I visit the old quarters of Bombay and they show me the chowks, you call them, of course we don't have to reproduce that. Of course not. But behind that idea, there was something very positive. There was a community that lived together, that shared some civic space. Why don't we think about these kind of schemes very local? You know that I'm obsessed with identity. Why don't we think about that in order to reconfigure the offering of public and affordable housing that we have? Again, I'm sorry if I have said things that are inconvenient or not accurate, but these are the things that go through my mind when in India, I think about affordable housing. Thank you very much.